The sleek research vessel glided through the atmosphere of Terra Luna, its silver hull reflecting the twin moons that gave the planet its name. Inside, Dr. Valerie Reeves adjusted her uniform and checked her reflection one last time. After 3 years of diplomatic negotiations, humans had finally been granted access to the Novanians' advanced research facilities, and as Earth's leading xenobiologist, she had been selected to represent humanity. Approaching docking bay, announced the ship's AI. Please prepare for arrival procedures. Valerie's stomach tightened with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The Novanians were notoriously private about their biological research, particularly their reproductive sciences. Their species had faced declining birth rates for generations, a crisis that had pushed their scientific community toward increasingly innovative solutions. As the airlock hissed open, Valerie was greeted by a tall, slender figure. The Novanian had luminescent blue skin with iridescent patterns that shifted subtly in the light. Large, almond-shaped eyes regarded her with undisguised curiosity. "Dr. Reeves, welcome to the Celestial Institute," the alien said in perfect English. "I am the Lyra, senior researcher of comparative biology. I will be your liaison during your stay." Valerie extended her hand before remembering the cultural briefing. "Forgive me," she said, quickly lowering her arm and instead offering a slight bow. "It's an honor to be here, researcher the Lyra." The Lyra's expression remained unreadable as she gestured for Valerie to follow. They moved through corridors of pearlescent material that seemed to glow from within. Throughout the walk, the Lyra maintained a professional distance, explaining the facility's layout with clinical precision. "Your quarters have been prepared according to human physiological requirements," the Lyra explained as they entered a laboratory space filled with equipment both familiar and alien. "You will have access to this research station during designated hours." Valerie nodded, taking in the advanced technology around her. "Your facilities are remarkable. I'm looking forward to our collaboration." "Collaboration is perhaps an ambitious term," the Lyra responded coolly. "You are here to observe and share Earth's research on reproductive genomics. The Council has very specific parameters for information exchange." Valerie sensed a tension in the Lyra's voice. "Of course. I understand the sensitivity of the subject matter." Something flickered across the Lyra's features, vulnerability, perhaps, before her professional mask returned. "You should rest before tomorrow's orientation. The circadian adjustment can be difficult for humans." Over the next few days, Valerie settled into a routine at the Institute. Each morning, she would review human reproductive research with Novanian scientists, and each afternoon, she would observe their work from a carefully controlled distance. The Lyra was always present, watchful and reticent. It wasn't until their 4th day together that Valerie noticed something unusual. While explaining a particular human genetic marker, she caught the Lyra wincing slightly, a hand pressed briefly against her abdomen. "Are you all right?" Valerie asked, pausing her presentation. "It's nothing," the Lyra responded sharply. "Please continue." But later, when they were alone reviewing data, Valerie broached the subject again. "I'm not just a scientist, you know. I was a medical doctor before specializing in xenobiology. If something's wrong—" "Nothing is wrong that can be fixed," the Lyra interrupted, her voice unusually emotional. She seemed to regret the outburst immediately, composing herself. "I apologize for my tone. It is a personal matter." Valerie hesitated, then said gently, "Sometimes an outside perspective can help. Different species, different solutions." For a long moment, the Lyra was silent, her luminescent patterns pulsing slowly. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am what my people call barren. A genetic anomaly prevents me from producing viable offspring. I study reproductive science not just for my species, but for myself." She looked directly at Valerie, her large eyes intense. "But we do not discuss such personal failures." Valerie felt a surge of empathy. On Earth, we've made great strides in treating similar conditions. Perhaps our research could. No, the Lyra said firmly, but without anger. It is not something your science can address. Our biology is too different. As the Lyra turned back to her work, Valerie couldn't help but wonder if that was entirely true. The universe was full of unexpected connections, and she had always excelled at finding them. Valerie spent the next few weeks immersed in the Novanian biological archives. Each day brought new revelations about their complex physiology, particularly their reproductive system with its triple helix genetic structure. But her thoughts kept returning to Thalira's condition. One evening, as the facility quieted for the night cycle, Valerie noticed a light still glowing from Thalira's private laboratory. She hesitated before knocking softly on the translucent door. "Enter," came the tired voice from within. The Lyra sat hunched over a holographic display, genetic sequences rotating slowly above her workstation. Her luminescent patterns seemed dimmer than usual, reflecting her exhaustion. "You're working late," Valerie observed, approaching carefully. "As are you," the Lyra responded without looking up. Valerie gestured to the display. "Your personal genome?" After a moment's hesitation, the Lyra nodded. "I have studied it countless times, searching for a solution." "May I?" Valerie asked, indicating the controls. The Lyra seemed surprised but moved aside. "Your expertise is in different biology entirely. Sometimes fresh eyes see what familiar ones miss," Valerie replied, beginning to manipulate the display. She expanded certain sections, comparing them to the Novanian baseline data she'd studied. Hours passed as they worked side by side, their professional barriers gradually dissolving as they focused on the puzzle before them. Valerie noticed something unusual, a dormant sequence in Thalira's genome that didn't match typical Novanian patterns. "This section here," she pointed. "It's unlike anything in your species' genomic library." The Lyra leaned closer, her bioluminescence brightening with interest. "That's impossible. All Novanians share core genetic structures." "Not this one," Valerie insisted. "This looks almost like adaptive material. Genetic code that's waiting for the right trigger." Their eyes met in the glow of the display, a moment of shared scientific curiosity that felt strangely intimate. For the first time, the Lyra smiled, a subtle change in her features that transformed her face. "Perhaps," the Lyra said carefully, "there are aspects of our biology that even we don't fully understand." In the days that followed, Valerie and Thalira's collaboration intensified. They spent every available moment in the laboratory, comparing notes and developing theories. The unusual genetic sequence became their shared obsession. "What if," Valerie proposed one day, "this isn't actually a defect? What if it's an evolutionary adaptation your species is developing?" The Lyra looked skeptical. "An adaptation to what?" "To genetic diversity," Valerie suggested. "Many species develop mechanisms to incorporate beneficial genes from other sources. Their research began to suggest something revolutionary. Thalira's barrenness might actually be a rare evolutionary leap, a mechanism designed to incorporate compatible genetic material from outside sources to strengthen the Novanian gene pool." "If we're right," Valerie said, excitement coloring her voice, "your body isn't failing to reproduce. It's waiting for something different." "Different how?" the Lyra asked, her voice barely audible. Valerie hesitated, then spoke the thought that had been forming in her mind. "Compatible genetic material that isn't Novanian." The implication hung in the air between them. Thalira's bioluminescent patterns pulsed rapidly, betraying her emotional response. "You're suggesting interspecies reproduction," she said finally. "That's unprecedented." "So is most scientific progress," Valerie replied gently. "The question is whether you're willing to explore the possibility." The Lyra turned away, staring out at the twin moons visible through the laboratory window. The council would never approve such research. Then we don't tell them yet, Valerie said, surprising herself with her boldness. We gather more data first. Prove our theory. The Lyra turned back, studying Valerie's face intently. You would risk your position here? Valerie nodded. For a discovery this important? Absolutely. Something shifted between them in that moment, a connection forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. As they returned to their work, Valerie couldn't help but wonder where this path might lead them both. The following weeks transformed their relationship from colleagues to confidants. Their secret research continued after hours, away from the watchful eyes of the Novanian Scientific Council. Each discovery brought them physically and emotionally closer. Look at this, the Lyra said one evening, her finger tracing a pattern on the holographic display. When exposed to human genetic material in simulation, the dormant genes activate. Valerie leaned in, her shoulder brushing against the Lyra's. It's responding specifically to human DNA. Not to the samples we tested from other species. The implications hung in the air between them. Their eyes met over the glow of the display, a moment of understanding passing between them without words. We need more direct testing, the Lyra said finally, her voice steady despite the radical nature of her suggestion. Valerie swallowed. You mean? A controlled experiment with living tissue samples. The Lyra's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with a new intensity. I volunteer myself. They began with small tests, cellular interactions in controlled environments. Each successful result brought a new level of excitement and a deeper bond between them. They worked late into the night cycles, sharing meals and stories as they monitored experiments. During one such night, Valerie shared her childhood dreams of exploring alien worlds. The Lyra listened intently, fascinated by Valerie's passionate descriptions of Earth's diverse ecosystems. What about you? Valerie asked. What did you dream of becoming? The Lyra's patterns dimmed slightly. I always wanted to be a mother, she admitted. To contribute to my species' continuation. When I discovered my condition, I channeled that desire into research instead. Valerie reached out, briefly touching the Lyra's hand. That dream might still be possible. Their fingers intertwined, human and alien, a bridge between worlds. As their research progressed, so did their relationship. Their conversations extended beyond science into philosophy, art, and personal hopes. Valerie found herself captivated by the Lyra's perspective on the universe, while the Lyra was drawn to Valerie's determined optimism. One evening, after a particularly promising breakthrough, they celebrated with a rare Novanian beverage that shimmered like liquid starlight. To new possibilities, Valerie toasted, her cheeks flushed with excitement. To crossing boundaries, the Lyra responded, her eyes never leaving Valerie's face. The moment between them stretched, charged with unspoken feelings. Valerie found herself leaning forward, drawn by an attraction that transcended species. Their lips met, an experimental union as groundbreaking as their research. When they pulled apart, the Lyra's bioluminescent patterns were pulsing rapidly, painting swirls of light across her blue skin. That was. The Lyra whispered. A logical next step in our research? Valerie suggested with a small smile. The Lyra laughed, a musical sound Valerie had never heard before. A hypothesis worth thorough investigation. Their relationship deepened alongside their scientific discoveries. Each night brought new intimacy, both intellectual and physical. They discovered surprising compatibilities between their different biologies, mapping new territories of interspecies connection. Throughout it all, their research continued to show promising results. The dormant genes in the Lyra's reproductive system responded positively to human genetic material, activating pathways previously thought impossible. We're close to proving it, Valerie said one night, analyzing the latest results. Your body isn't broken, it's evolved for something unprecedented. Thalira's hand found Valerie's. Something like us? The question contained worlds of possibility and uncertainty. Valerie squeezed Thalira's hand in response, her scientific mind racing with implications while her heart beat with simpler truths. Neither of them spoke the obvious conclusion of their research, that the ultimate test would be actual conception. The thought hovered between them, unspoken but increasingly inevitable as their research and relationship progressed toward an intersection of the personal and the scientific. One morning, the Lyra arrived at the lab looking disoriented. Her bioluminescent patterns flickered erratically, and she clutched her abdomen. "Something's happening," she whispered to Valerie. "I feel different." Concerned, Valerie guided her to their private research room and ran a comprehensive scan. As the results materialized on the holographic display, both women froze in disbelief. "That's impossible," the Lyra breathed, staring at the unmistakable signature of cellular division occurring within her reproductive system. "It's happening," Valerie said, her voice filled with wonder. "You're pregnant." The confirmation sent shockwaves through both of them. What had begun as theoretical research had manifested in biological reality. Their relationship had created something unprecedented in known galactic history, a hybrid child. "We need to run more tests," Valerie said, switching to scientist mode despite her emotional turmoil. "We need to ensure both you and the embryo are stable." The Lyra nodded, her hand protectively covering her abdomen. "If the council discovers this..." "They won't," Valerie promised. "Not until we understand exactly what's happening." For days, they monitored the pregnancy in secret. The embryo was developing at an accelerated rate, already showing signs of both species' genetic influences. Thalira's body had adapted remarkably, creating a specialized environment for this unique life. "Your dormant genes didn't just activate," Valerie explained, reviewing the data. "They're transforming to accommodate human DNA. It's evolutionary adaptation happening in real time." "A perfect union," the Lyra murmured, watching the holographic image of the developing embryo. Her patterns glowed with a new vibrancy that reflected her changing physiology. Their bubble of secrecy burst when the Lyra collapsed during a routine council meeting. The medical team immediately detected her condition, and within hours, the news spread throughout the institute. The council summoned them both to an emergency session. Seated before the 7 senior Novanians, Valerie felt a chill of apprehension. "You have violated our most sacred protocols," the head counselor stated, his tone severe. "Unauthorized genetic experimentation. Interspecies reproduction. These are unprecedented transgressions." Valerie stepped forward. "With respect, counselors, what's happened isn't a transgression, it's a breakthrough. Researcher Thalira's genetic makeup represents an evolutionary adaptation that could save your species." "Explain," demanded one of the female counselors, her interest seemingly piqued despite the gravity of the situation. Valerie presented their research, explaining how Thalira's supposedly defective genes were actually an evolutionary response to the Novanians' genetic stagnation and declining birth rates. Her body was designed to incorporate genetic diversity from compatible species, Valerie concluded. "This pregnancy proves it's not just possible, it's successful. The embryo is healthy and developing normally." The council chambers erupted in murmurs. The Lyra rose to stand beside Valerie, her head held high despite the scrutiny. "I was called barren," she said clearly. "A failure to our species. But now I carry new life, a child that represents hope for our future. Will you condemn that hope, or embrace it?" The debate lasted for hours. Some counselors argued for immediate termination of the pregnancy as an abomination, others saw the scientific potential. Throughout it all, Valerie and the Lyra stood united, their hands clasped tightly together. Finally, the head counselor spoke. "This situation is without precedent. While we cannot condone your methods, we cannot ignore the potential significance. The pregnancy will be allowed to continue under strict medical supervision. As they left the council chambers, the Lyra leaned heavily against Valerie, overwhelmed by both relief and exhaustion. They didn't separate us, she whispered. Valerie held her close. They couldn't. We're making history, together. Word spread quickly through the scientific community. The first confirmed human Novanian pregnancy became the most studied biological event in recent galactic history. Researchers from across known space requested access to their data, while cultural commentators debated the ethical implications. Through it all, Valerie and the Lyra focused on their growing child and relationship. As the Lyra's pregnancy progressed, her body underwent remarkable adaptations. Her bioluminescent patterns intensified, developing new colors that pulsed in rhythm with the developing hybrid's heartbeat. The medical team says everything is developing perfectly, Valerie reported one evening, returning from a meeting with the specialists. Our child has functioning systems from both species. The Lyra smiled, guiding Valerie's hand to a spot where movement could be felt. She has your determination. Always moving, exploring boundaries. She? Valerie asked, surprised. I can sense her, the Lyra explained. My species has connections to our children before birth. She'll have your eyes. Not everyone celebrated their miracle. Protesters gathered outside the institute, some claiming the hybrid child represented a threat to Novanian genetic purity, others arguing that humans were overstepping boundaries. Security measures were implemented, isolating Valerie and the Lyra from the growing controversy. The night before their child's birth, they stood together at the window of their quarters, watching Terra Luna's twin moons rise. Are you afraid? Valerie asked softly. Yes, the Lyra admitted. But not of tomorrow. I fear what our daughter will face in a universe that may not be ready for her. She'll have us, Valerie said firmly. And she'll carry both our strengths. The birth itself was surprisingly uncomplicated. Novanian medical technology, combined with the Lyra's evolved biology, ensured a smooth process. When the medical team placed the newborn in their arms, both women were speechless. Their daughter had the Lyra's luminescent blue skin, though paler, with subtle patterns that shifted like Earth's northern lights. Her eyes were unmistakably human, Valerie's deep brown, but larger, with the distinctive Novanian shape. 10 perfect fingers and toes completed her hybrid form. She's beautiful, Valerie whispered. She's impossible, added one of the medical staff in awe. The council convened a special session to address the birth. This time, Valerie and the Lyra attended with their daughter, presenting not just as research subjects but as a family. This child represents more than a scientific breakthrough, the Lyra stated. She proves that our futures are intertwined. What some called my defect was actually evolution's solution. The head counselor approached, looking down at the infant with undisguised fascination. She is the first of her kind, he acknowledged. What will you name her? Valerie and the Lyra exchanged a glance, having discussed this moment extensively. Nova, the Lyra answered. In honor of my people. Stella, added Valerie. After the stars that guided humanity outward. Nova Stella, the counselor repeated. A new star. He straightened, addressing the chamber. The council recognizes this child as a citizen of both worlds. Furthermore, we approve funding for expanded research into adaptive genetics. This discovery may indeed hold the key to our species' future. As they left the chamber, they were met not with protests but with curious onlookers, Novanians and visiting humans alike, eager to glimpse the child who bridged their worlds. What happens now? Valerie asked as they walked through the corridor, their daughter sleeping peacefully against the Lyra's chest. We continue our research, the Lyra replied. There are others like me who might benefit from what we've learned. And us? Valerie pressed gently. The Lyra's free hand found Valerie's. We build something new, together. Just like she is something new. As Nova Stella opened her eyes, her skin pulsed with light that seemed to answer her mother's touch, a perfect synthesis of two worlds that had once seemed impossibly distant but now, through love and science, had created a bridge to the future.